welcome to On the Ledger. This week, we're going to talk about enterprise security. And if you don't know what that is, it's crypto security for businesses. So I'm joined today by Charles Guillemet, who's our CTO, and Alex Zinder, who leads the enterprise business and product here at Ledger. And we are going to unpack this issue, which is probably more important to you than you think it is, even if you are not a business. So guys, I'm going to, ask questions that are, intentionally naive on this topic. I talk to people about it all the time, and I think that A, they just don't think about it, and B, that there are a lot of specifics here that are important to them, but they don't realize are important to them. So what I'd really like is for people to just have a better understanding of why that is, how it works, and what they should be thinking about in a variety of contexts, whether that's kind of the banking context or, just digital assets broadly, the kinds of things that Nike and Starbucks, or, Dead Fellas and Cool Cats are doing, right? It turns out that enterprise security covers, this entire spectrum. So the way that I think about it, when I describe to people is that, we have, incredible security as Ledger. But that security, as when you buy a Ledger Nano, is designed for the individual, right? Now, what does it lack? It lacks governance. And what is meant by governance? So A, do I have that right? And then B, for the average user, what the hell does that mean?
When I joined the company in 2017, the idea of building a product for enterprise was already in the air. And it was quite clear, but it was not completely clear what we needed to build. We had the Nano S, which was very successful already, and everyone in the space with some awareness about the security challenges was using Nano devices. And when I say everyone, it also includes enterprise segments like family offices, hedge funds, exchanges. They had no clue how to secure their assets, and quite often they were using Nano devices for their cold wallet. And for the others, they were getting wrecked quite often, unfortunately. And so what we wanted to build was a product which would be as secure as Nano devices, but for enterprise. What's the big difference with enterprise versus a retail audience? First of all, enterprise have often more assets to secure, but at the end, if you secure a private key is a private key, so it's not really that. What is really important is governance. How do I access to my funds? What are the rules that I can implement to access to the funds, to move them, to transfer them, to receive funds? All there's a permission to access to the funds are governance. With a Nano, you have one pin, one seed, and that's it. So that means you have the knowledge of the pin and an access to the device, or you have the knowledge of the 24 words, and that's it. You have the full access over the funds. So what we wanted to build is to create a product enabling enterprise to say, okay, I have this account, this group of people in my organization has an access to this account. If they want to make transaction, they can do transaction up to this threshold. If they want to make transaction of an higher amount, they will have to gather approval 3 out of 5, like this kind of governance rule. That was the idea when we started to build the Ledger Vault.
So I want to bring this back to our audience in a way that feels very practical for them, because what I see going on in the market is totally crazy, right? So let's just take some assumptions that you just said as facts. So Ledger has sufficient security and sort of from a level of security perspective and the way that we protect private keys. And for anybody that hasn't listened to the interview that I did in December with Charles, I really encourage them to as a prerequisite to this particular interview, because you'll understand that Ledger level of security. So let's just, first of all, for the audience, make the assumption that the Ledger level of security is sufficient, but it's not sufficient for an organization such as a company or a DAO or something, because it lacks governance. And the example that I always use is, you're not going to, just kind of give your recovery phrase to your most trustworthy IT person if you're, say, Nike, Starbucks, LVMH. And now we start to go into other places. You mentioned exchanges. I mentioned NFT projects. So what I see going on out there is certainly I would say probably most NFT projects run on a ledger. Maybe Gnosis Safe, and I want to touch on that in a second. But they run on a ledger often, and I've certainly talked to NFT projects, that can't move any money from the treasury if the founder is not available at that moment. If the founder happens to be on vacation, there's no movement of funds. Like, God forbid something horrible happens, to the founder in that scenario. We also know that there are exchanges who run on nanos, right? And that when there's maybe a freeze on assets that is lifted after a few hours, that was them going to the safe, getting out the nano, moving some funds around, which also means that somebody has a copy of the recovery phrase, right? So there's obviously a lot of trust in that scenario. So I just want to point out to people that this isn't some like, oh well, I'm an individual, so I don't need to worry about this, because as an individual you do interact with enterprises or corporations or DAOs or organizations or even NFT projects in the course of your life. And what solution those people are using, what solution that organization is using, is super important to you and your assets and the contracts that govern those assets. So it's probably more important to you as an individual than you realize. And what's going on in the space right now, like if you're making the assumption that the organizations that you interact with are using good enterprise security, you're probably also making a mistake, because what's going on in the space right now is totally bananas and Wild West. And I assume that we'll look back on this in 10 years and go, oh my God, I can't believe that used to be the way the industry runs. Am I off base? And I'm not trying to be alarmist. I'm just sort of saying what I see, in my everyday life. Am I off or on base with that?
And I think you're dead on, and I think Charles brought up some really good points. As governance is really at the core of what we do with enterprise, but fundamentally, the way we like to synthesize it is Ledger is best of breed in security in crypto, right? We know that we're industry leading in that space. What we needed to do with enterprise is address the dimension of scale, right? So, and the way it breaks down is there's really three core dimensions of scale that we need to look at from a product and from a pain point perspective. One is scale of value. Right, Charles has said this already. Enterprises and large organizations hold more value in crypto, so we need to make sure that we address that. The more value you have, the more malicious actors are going to be interested in attacking you with different vectors, spoofing, and also you need to have more than one individual responsible for that value. You can't have one guy making decisions with billions in assets. So that's the core and primary driver of scale. The second dimension of scale that we address is scale of complexity. Right. So in the last 2 years, we've seen a huge emergence in a wide range of different use cases. To your point, NFTs, DeFi, new layer ones. The world of crypto has been constantly changing at increasing rates, and that really creates new and constantly changing attack vectors that need that strong governance and strong security to be able to manage properly. And then the third dimension is the dimension of operational scale. Right. So crypto doesn't sleep. You need support 24/7. You have users all around the globe, and you need to make sure that you have the operational controls, the teams in place, and the services and the support to be able to continue to maintain that level of operation to service your retail audience, which is completely global. Those things together really make up the primary dimensions of what we do with Ledger Enterprise, and where you as an organization need to focus your assets and your resources if you want to run a successful business in crypto, and more importantly, if you want to create a cohesive and secure service to your retail audience.
Okay, so let's like why is it then that it's you know that's the question I want to ask is what's the gap between today and that kind of wild west that I mentioned and getting to where anyone who isn't an individual and has digital assets has good enterprise security, right? Because this is what I feel is that we're in we are still in the relative early days of crypto ownership. If I look at even what we've seen over the last 2 years, like a real ballooning and contracting of the number of people who offer crypto services to people. There was maybe a bit of a ballooning of security adoption over that time, but I would also say that security adoption kind of didn't match the bubble, right? We had more more growth than we had a security adoption. I talk a lot about, I think what a lot of people are willing to do is they are willing to compromise on both security and self-custody to get, kind of the ease of use or the value. We don't compromise on either security or self-custody. So I want to come back to what self-custody means in the enterprise context. But what's why is there still this gap between, it feels to me like consumers understand that they really need to move, up market in terms of security. They need to go from lower security to higher security. That feels like it's very, felt in the marketplace, whether it's on the security side because they see people getting wrecked, or it's on, just the self-custody side because they see people getting wrecked. There's kind of an appreciation of that. But I feel like the appreciation and understanding of it on the enterprise side and the implications both for enterprise and for customers, is still relatively low. So, why do we think that is? And then what do we think it takes, to get, adoption?
Great question. And we actually we did quite a bit on this late last year. So I think there's an interesting parallel here going back to consumer education, right? Because the challenge is, as a consumer in Web3, the parties that you're interacting with, the players that are offering you services around NFTs, around exchanges, right? All the things that you can do with your crypto, it's not super transparent as to what are the types of controls, right? And how are they managing their business, how they're managing your interactions with them. That's why we really focused on making sure that the consumer audience is very well educated and knows which questions to ask to their service providers, right? And how to best really understand who's on the other side of the transaction, who are you interacting with as a service provider in crypto. So last year we launched our consumer protection campaign, and there, 4 very simple areas to focus on, and 4 questions that anybody out there who is, participating in the crypto ecosystem should ask their service provider, whether that's an exchange, whether that's a NFT community or anything that you're engaged with. They should be able to answer those questions. One is, are you using enterprise grade security? Right? Are they using, to your point, Ian, are they still using nanos? Are they using a software wallet in some cases? Or are they actually investing fully in enterprise grade security to be able to support the use cases they're bringing to market? The second piece is really working with your audience as an organization to allow and endorse self-custody. Right, because the only real true security in this space is self-custody, and as an organization in the world of crypto, you should be able to work with your retail audience to educate them on the world of self-custody and support that model to the extent possible. Third piece is around governance, right? You need to have strong governance to protect against internal threats. So that kind of plays into that scale of complexity piece. Organizations have complex processes. If you're running a business, you need to have a team dedicated to managing the business and the processes associated with it. And to be able to do that with crypto, you need the right governance controls and the right governance model. And the fourth one is transparent operations. You have to have transparency. You have to have the right reporting capabilities. You really need to be able to know where your assets are at any given point in time and manage it across the different balances, different accounts, and different processes that you have. So governance helps you manage that, but full transparency needs to be in place to build trust with your user base.
Yeah, to add on this and to understand to answer to your question, also Ian, I think today we are still very early in enterprise and financial institution adoption. Like when we started to build Ledger Vault, at this time we were thinking that the traditional finance would go to crypto and our customers would be like big bank going to crypto. But this is not exactly what happened. What happened was a new financial institution who started from scratch. Sometimes that was some people who just got rich because they invested in Bitcoin in 2011 and suddenly they had plenty of money. But most of these companies, especially at this time, were very new and not mature at all. And we built thinking about like enterprise grade security. And I think we are still early in the way where financial institution gets more mature and use more mature products in general. I think this is where we are. So the good news is that the player who started in 2017 got older and more mature and so on, and they understand better the value proposition of Ledger Vault. And secondly, the bet we took 5 years ago start to be true because we start to see brands like a very mature brand, but also a financial institution going to crypto, which was not the case earlier. But this is where we are. We are at this pivot point where our client and the market for enterprise gets more mature, I think.
That's a great point, Charles. And I think there's two kind of two synergies in education where we have to manage, right? You have to work with the crypto native players to increase the level of operational maturity and readiness, right? And you have to work with the traditional players to get them to better understand crypto and the level of risk in the crypto ecosystem. And we're now starting to see those two things converge quite well, and it's a super exciting time.
Yeah, I think it's two things I want to come back to. One is the Ledger Vault product specifically and how it works. And the other is it is an exciting time. I mean, we've got new news on regulation on a weekly basis at this point. And my feeling actually is that, Ledger is pretty well, poised to be useful in that actually. But I want to, let's put a pin in those two things for a second. I'd like to come back to the security and the architecture for a second, because I had the CISO of an exchange that we all like and respect. Charles, I think you know who I'm talking about. I would say his name because I don't think he would mind, but I won't, just out of politeness, because it was a private conversation and I don't know if he'd want me to say his name. So my apologies to him if he would want me to. But he said to me, Ian, Ledger Enterprise are the only ones who do it right. I mean, he's like, I've looked at everything. And you guys are the only ones who do it right. And this was good for me to hear because I don't know the technology and the architecture as well as the two of you do. So having this kind of independent, voice that I trust was important to me personally. And I was like, okay, I'm happy to hear that. Tell me what you mean. And he said, look, nobody else has. He said what he said is everything else is security theater. Everything else is a door behind a door behind a door behind a door behind a door. And if I say door enough times, you're supposed to feel secure. But the reality is that nobody else has an answer to the question, if we go, what happens if you go out of business? In other words, I'm a bank, I'm like choosing a partner for my enterprise security. And Ledger are the only people who can say, if we cease to exist on the planet, you're fine. Right. So that means that we have something unique in the way that we do, the way that we do our security and our architecture and the way that we think about it, relative to the competition. So, Charles, can you explain, architecturally, what it is that we're doing so different from everybody else?
Yeah, sure. If you remember the discussion we had about the security of the Nano, we started from the same point. Like we wanted to achieve three main security properties. The first one is generating your keys in a secure place. The second one was like implementing the cryptography in a secure enclave. And the third one is providing the user a way to understand what he is about to consent in a trusted manner, like this is the trusted display property. And then on top of that, we wanted to add a governance layer. And the governance layer is as important as the security, because when you start to think about the security with the governance, you start to think as like from an adversarial standpoint, like one user in the organization, if he does not has full access to Ledger Vault, he is potentially an attacker. Like you have to think like this. So in order to build this with this requirement in mind, we didn't start from scratch. We use like banking grade security, hardware security materials, which are HSM. So we are using hardware security module. So this is the kind of hardware that is used for identity and banking. And the first thing we did was like selecting one of the device on the market. And the first thing we did was to evaluate the security of the device. We spent a month trying to find vulnerabilities. And this is actually what we did. Like there's HSM used by the banking and identity. We found a few vulnerabilities, and then we worked with the provider in order to fix them. So this is always, we start from that. We don't trust, we verify, and then if we find vulnerability, we simply fix them. So this is what we did. And so we had this HSM, which is basically a secure enclave, a dedicated piece of hardware where the keys are laying and where the cryptography is implemented. We also wanted some governance in the key generation. So we have different roles in Ledger Vault, and one of the role is the seed owner, shared owners. And there are 3 people in the organization, and they have devices in hand. And within these devices, they are generating secrets. And 1/3 of each person is generating 1/3 of the secret. And then there is what we call the secure channel, which is mounted from this personal security device to the HSM. And this secure channel is used to provision the 3rd shards of the key to the HSM. And the HSM recombine this shard in order to create the main seed for a given customer. So this is the first property, like generating the key in a secure enclave. So they are generated 1/3 in a personal security device, another 1/3 in another, and the third shard in another personal security device, then provision to the HSM through secure channel. The second property is about implementing cryptography in a secure enclave. So we are using the HSM as a secure enclave. This is basically a dedicated device which is only used for the security part of your application. And it does mostly cryptography. And the third thing is providing a way to the user to understand in a human readable way what it is about to consent. And then we had an issue because an HSM doesn't have a screen. So this is also why we are using a personal security device that we give to the customers. And you can see the personal security device as a remote screen to the HSM. This is quite fair to say this. So we have this setup, and then when it comes to governance, as I mentioned, like we think governance is as important as the security itself. That's why we wanted to implement this governance within a secure enclave also. That was not easy because HSM are not built for that. They are following like PKCS 11 kind of interface, which is not that useful when you implement cryptocurrency management. So we get rid of this PKCS 11 interface, and we were able to load our own operating system plus the governance layer. And as a Ledger Vault user, when you want to use the product, you will define a set of rules for your governance. So maybe you will say like these users can access to this account if they want to make transaction to this address. They can because this is a whitelisted address. If they want to make transaction above a certain threshold, they will need to gather 3 approval out of 7, like this kind of thing. One of the approval must come from the CFO, and all these rules are completely defined by the users, and they are enforced within the HSM. Within the HSM, there is a governance engine which simply verify if the rules are met, and if they are met, the HSM will be able to sign transaction or modify the governance, or like every sensitive operation goes through this governance engine. So I think this is about it. Like the 3 main properties: generating your keys in a secure enclave. The second, cryptography implemented in a secure enclave. The third one, having a secure display, clear signing all the way. And the same applies with governance. Like what I described is very low level, close to the blockchain, but the governance also implements those properties.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I hope that that users take that in, or the listeners take that in, because it's Pascal, has said, and I agree. I think Ledger Enterprise is like the best kept secret in the industry. I think for the the kind of completeness and utility of the solution that you just described is kind of incredible. Yet it's still not even what we're known for in a way. And I mean, that's why we're here talking today. I think I take at least partial responsibility for that fact. But also, it's quite it's quite difficult to explain the difference, and it gets back to kind of the market adoption question that we were talking about earlier. I think what would be helpful, maybe continue, Charles, and pretend that I am, the head of IT at a big brand, a Starbucks, Nike, LVMH, Adidas, and I've got an array of solutions in front of me. I'm not a crypto expert. Here's what I know. My business is going from having 0 digital assets and 0 digital treasury to having more than 0. I don't even know really how important this is to my business yet. I'm kind of going from 0 to 1, not 0 to 100. And I'm looking out there, and look, I know luxury brands that have their contracts and their assets protected by Chrome and MetaMask. You know what I mean? So that's one end of the spectrum. A Nano would be one step above that. Then you've got maybe something like Gnosis Safe, and then maybe you've got an MPC solution. I don't know. You tell me if I'm going like right up the spectrum or not. And then what I think that we believe people should be using is the architecture that you just described for security, which gives them true enterprise security, the kind of self-custody at the enterprise level, and governance. Right. Maybe just like you and I did, Charles, on the podcast about personal security, we compared with a software wallet. We compared with a hardware, or with a piece of hardware that maybe stores in an enclave but doesn't. But that's all. And we compared with some hardware wallets that don't have the same level of security of Ledger, and then you get to Ledger. Like, tell me that's maybe if you could just expose each of those, the failures in your view. In each of those other solutions, kind of going up that stack, it would be maybe useful to that listener.
Okay, so if I start with software wallet and MetaMask or this kind of thing, I will be very brief about that, because when your keys are inside a software, or MetaMask is one of them, and so on, they are simply not secure. Any kind of malware on your machine is able to get access to the keys, is able to trigger transaction, and that's it. So this is simply impossible to secure your computer against this kind of threat. So you are screwed if you do that. Then if you are an enterprise and you are using a hardware wallet, you are using the best hardware wallet out there, like Ledger devices. Your keys are secure in the secure element, but you have a governance issue, because at some point there is one guy in your organization that has full access to the funds of your organization. The funds can be the one of your organization, but there can be the funds of your clients. So this is a big responsibility. So first of all, you have to completely
I actually
trust.
wanted to just tell two. I have two horror stories from the past couple of years about that. Again, to bring it, back to real life for people. I remember two calls specifically. One was from a Ledger customer who said, our organization, I think maybe they were a law firm even, it just lost $5 million. They actually weren't calling us. They were really just calling us to see if we could help with the investigation because they knew exactly what happened. And we said, okay, who has the the recovery phrase? And they said, our head of IT. And we said, where's your head of IT? And they said, we don't know. So that's the sin that our response was. I mean, actually, we did help them with the investigation because there was just some tracking that they needed to do and law enforcement and those sorts of things. But the good advice was like maybe check local plastic surgeons, right? To your point about having one person who has access to the funds of the company. Another really sad example for me was a company a partner that we actually liked quite a bit. I really liked the CEO personally. I thought he was very clever and had a great vision for the company. But we get a call from the chairman one day, and there's a fire sale at the company. And okay, well, where's the CEO? And they're like, well, he had he had all of the funds of the company on his Nano. The recovery phrase was in his 1Password. His 1Password got compromised, and the funds of the company are gone. And now so is the CEO, and now so is the company. So this is you might think it's okay in the short term. Another horror story worth mentioning, and I didn't even mention just custodians, which I think is like a big solution for people. I mean, we've heard from multiple businesses over the past few months now that they had their corporate treasury with FTX, right, which evaporated overnight. And there are other many of custodial enterprise solutions. So we should add that one to the list. But I just wanted to point out for the listeners, like, this is not theoretical risk. And my fear actually is that people will care more about this topic over the next 2 or 3 years, because this is the next wave of horror stories that we are going to hear.
Yeah, I have another one in mind, like Quadriga CX, which was a big exchange, and the CEO had a full access to the cold wallet of the company, and he was the only one having full access to this wallet. And at some point, he totally disappeared, and a death certificate of him has been produced, and everyone thought that he was dead. And the funds of everyone was simply like disappeared completely. And quite recently, a few months ago, we saw the funds on chain moving. So we don't know if the guy is alive, or we don't know, but someone had an access to these funds and was able to move these funds. So this is not like hypothetical stories. This is happening right now over and over. And yeah, as I mentioned, if you are the only one having an access to the funds in your company, like, the company must trust you a lot. But it's not only trust, because you can do a mistake, or someone can threaten your family and force you to move funds. This is about that. Like, when it's about billions, when it's about millions or billions, like, you have to take all of this in mind, or otherwise you have this horror story. Maybe the last example could be MPC. MPC stands for multi-party computation. So this is a field of cryptography allowing to do some computation in a distributed manner. And when we talk about MPC for cryptocurrency management, what we talk about is a threshold signature scheme. So this is the specific part of MPC. And threshold signature schemes allow to produce valid signature by doing partial computation on different computers, for instance. So you say you shard your keys in three shards, and you produce partial signature, 3 partial signature, and when you recombine the signatures, you are able to create a valid signature to do on-chain transaction. So this is the idea, and from a cryptographic standpoint, I think this is a really interesting idea because the mathematics are quite interesting and so on. But I have a few concerns about the trusted signature scheme today. So the first one is it's a very nascent field of cryptography. The schemes are evolving again and again because some people are finding vulnerabilities on previous protocol, and then a new protocol arrives and so on. This is the normal way science is working. There is no debate about that. So I'm quite bullish on the science part, but I think it's still early to transform science into products. There is some risk associated to do that today. So this is why I'm a little bit conservative on this. The second part is the following: when you shard your key in several subkeys, let's say, several shards, your governance is done forever. It's not very flexible, and in order to create different scheme, it can be tricky. And also you have another issue, which is your partial signature still must be implemented in a secure enclave. Otherwise, you are just saying, okay, I've sharded my keys in two shards, and then I don't have to protect the shards. I think this is a mistake. Implementing MPC is probably a good idea. It will be a better idea later, I think, but it could be a good idea. But if you do that, you have to protect your shards. I think it's important to use like a hardware enforced solution to implement the cryptography, even if it's a trusted signature scheme. And finally, the same applies with governance. Your governance must be implemented in a secure enclave. This is what we are doing. Otherwise, you just have to break the governance and that's it. And finally, the trusted display is again not something you can bypass. When you are about to consent for a transaction, you need to be able to understand in a human readable way, in a trusted display, what you are about to consent. So this would be my main concern about where we are in MPC solution today. So I'm not against MPC again. I think in terms of science, this is something really interesting. I think it still needs to pass the test of time. This is ongoing, but it's not yet. We are not there yet, I think. And also, if you use MPC for your solution, you still have to use the hardware secure hardware to implement your cryptography in the secure enclave, and you still need to show to the user what he is about to consent in a trusted manner. So this is really, really important.
I think I could, if I come back to that, that IT person at the brand who's, originally asking the question. First of all, it's super helpful, and I think it also gives people a lot of context for how we think about the particular problem. And I think it's always, for me, it's always, helpful because it's, I feel like when we talk about these things, at the end, someone goes, "Wow, you guys are really serious about security, aren't you?" No, we're actually serious. And the reality, if I'm talking to that IT person again, is you go, if somebody is showing you the interface, to your new corporate vault, and the way that you approve a transaction is on your iPhone, just hand it back to them and say, "No, thank you." Right? To me, it's that simple, because without, just like we were talking about, on the consumer side, if you do not have a secure display, if you don't have a trusted display, you do not have security, right? So, I'm going to make, again, IT person from Adidas, let me make your job super easy. Somebody shows you a solution and the way you approve a transaction is on your iPhone. Just hand it back to them and say, "No, thank you. You've got a busy day, but you don't need to see the solution," right? So I would like to see a solution that's actually self-custody, that's actually on a trusted display. Like, these are the things that you should be asking for in your life. And so again, if someone tells you a solution and like our CISO friend said, it's a door behind a door and it's security theater and it's actually custody, no thank you. Somebody shows you something and you approve that transaction on an iPhone or an Android phone, no thank you. You want real security and real self-custody? Okay, call Alex. So let's turn for a moment then to the product side of this, because also at the end of the
Maybe
day,
just
oh yeah, please, Charles,
just
go.
a little comment about what you just said in terms of self custody. Like this is also something very important when you use Trestle signature schemes or MPC. Ask yourself who has access to the keys. Like, am I able to approve transaction only with the people in my organization, or do I rely on a third party? This is something you have to ask yourself. And the same applies for independent recovery. When if ever your technology providers collapse for any reason, like technology or financial, like if it collapses, do you have a way to recover your assets completely independently on another solution? If you use Ledger Vault, the short answer is yes. You can use a hardware wallet to simply recover your keys for the vault and use them for moving your funds and so on. Just because we are implementing the standards, the BIP32 standards, which is not the case for MPC, especially just because it's incredibly difficult to do like to implement BIP32 in a MPC manner.
No, actually, I think that's so. The list of things that if I'm that IT person, the list of things that I should be thinking about are, independent recovery, and it's interesting because that one is a new one for most people, right? Because they're accustomed to a bank, where this is actually much more. It's called Ledger Vault. It's actually much more like a vault or a safe, right? Because you're not banking. You are storing critical digital assets that you could potentially lose. It's what makes it both more critical and unique, right? Because it's and frankly independent of the institution that you store it with, which I think is also that's the interesting thing here is you've got what is probably treasury management on some side, but it's actually more like almost supply chain management, right? In terms of what an organization is used to doing, right? Because you're securing something physical that it's not physical, but it is like storing something that could be lost, right? Like a pile of shoes could be lost. So that list of things again is independent recovery, the governance side of things, and where is the governance done. And also, give me the list. I'm sorry. I'm trying to make the list in my head, but you have the better list, and you just added independent recovery to it.
Yeah, I can jump in from a product perspective, and that's what we really bring to market, and that's where the differentiation is. So Charles did a fantastic job describing the technology stack, and it's incredible the amount of work and complexity that the team deals with on a daily basis to be able to bring something like this to market. We joke like what we do is really, really fundamentally hard because it's security at the core. But the model that we have scales so well that we can actually scale that security model for a wide range of different use cases and productize it. And that's kind of exactly what we focus in the enterprise organization. So the three factors are very straightforward, actually, right? You get self-custody, right? You get governance, and you get operational workflow, each one of those things with hardware at the core. Right, so because Ledger does hardware fundamentally well, we also have our own firmware capability, which means we write our own operating system on top of the hardware that we do really well, and that's really the hard part. And those two core pillars allow us then to build secure software to support a very wide range of different use cases that scales very seamlessly. So some of the constraints that Charles mentioned with MPC, where the governance layer and the multi-signature layer are actually coupled together, so it's very difficult to unbundle them. So adding new governance rules is challenging. For example, Ian, you mentioned Gnosis, right? Gnosis is a multi-sig model. There's limitations because it's supported at the protocol level. It's a great model, right, if you're doing Ethereum, but if you're doing other protocols, it's much more difficult to implement. Another piece of multi-sig is that the shards still need to be maintained with hardware security. So most of the people that are using Gnosis actually use nanos for the multi-sig aspect. And then same thing, because the governance is implemented at the protocol level, it's very difficult to decouple and have a flexible governance layer within that model, right? So with Ledger Enterprise, because we invested in the hardware, in the firmware, we're now able to build the software on top of that to support a wide range of different use cases and governance capabilities. So you get the self-custody aspect. So with the hardware that you have the multiple shards, you have full recoverability, full self-custody as a business, same as you do with Ledger as an individual. On top of that, we have the fully flexible governance model. So you can update your governance rules in real time. There's a separation of concerns there between administrator users and operator users. So your operators are never setting up the rules. You can have administrators setting up all the rules and a different part of the organization that is working within that rule set. And the benefit there is that when you want to change your whitelist or you want to change your thresholds or you want to add an account or somebody leaves the organization, you can do those updates in real time and know that they're being executed and managed securely within our firmware layer on top of the hardware that we work with. And then the last piece is the operating model itself, where we're putting secure hardware with full what you see is what you sign, secure screens in the hands of your operators that they're using on a daily basis to manage all your transactions and operational workflow, where you know that their cell phone, Ian, as you mentioned, or the browser can't be compromised. There's no possibility of a man-in-the-middle attack because the secure device is showing you exactly what it is that you're approving. And those are the three critical factors. Now, on top of that, we have a full suite of reporting, governance management capabilities, value-added services and integrations, and we support a wide range of different layer 1 networks with that same schema, so you don't have to adjust your operating model depending on the use case that you're executing or the chain that you're working on, right? It's the same governance whether you're on Ethereum, on Polygon, on Solana, on Polkadot, the list goes on. And it's the same model whether or not you're doing treasury management, which is foundational, just account management and payments, as well as NFT use cases with smart contract management, minting, and other operations, or DeFi where you're interacting with smart contracts or staking. So the core element is we help you do self-custody and secure the keys. And then from there, you have a flexible framework as to how you manage and secure all of your interactions with the underlying layer 1s, right? An interaction can be anything from a send-receive transaction to a smart contract interaction to a mint, to the creation of a smart contract across many different protocols. And it's that flexibility that is really differentiating.
It's super helpful. And thank you for putting it together too for people in a practical way in terms of like, what is the product that I'm getting if I'm getting Ledger Vault. Really what I want to do is I want to, encourage anyone who's using, any project, anywhere with digital assets to ask, the people, who are, now that you have this kind of understanding of what you should be asking about, ask the people who are protecting the things that are valuable to you, whether that's, your assets or the contracts or whatever, what are they using? And if they're not using Ledger Vault, why? I mean, I'm genuinely curious about the answer to that question based on what I know, because I think a lot of people have made, subpar choices. Again, people seem to be willing to compromise on security and self-custody in ways that we aren't. Maybe that's just kind of lack of appreciation. Maybe it's because we haven't heard all those horror stories yet. But hopefully people have, after this conversation, have a bit more of an understanding as to why these things, are important, and we're not being, just kind of difficult or pedantic, on this topic. Let me ask you this, on that. Okay, so two questions, Alex. If somebody, kind of is moved by what we're saying and they want to become a Ledger Vault customer, what do they do? It's not like they go to Best Buy and buy a Ledger Vault.
No, I mean, come visit us. There's a ton of materials. You can reach out to us directly on enterprise.ledger.com. Go to the website. The product suite is well documented there. We have our full public APIs and developer center available. All the links are on the website. Come request a demo. We're very open. We share everything. So definitely, enterprise.ledger.com, and then come fill out the form and we'll reach out to you.
Cool. And then, with all of this talk about, things changing in the regulatory world right now, tell me if I'm, what I'm missing here, but it seems to me the way that we manage assets, is more in line with, with what, with where people are going, because it's about, kind of direct management, protocol staking without kind of a banking layer in between, these kinds of things. So, do you see, Ledger Enterprise, being more important, in the direction that the regulatory, winds are blowing, or am I overestimating that?
No, I think that's a great point to bring up, and obviously very timely with the recent events that we've seen in the ecosystem, and now that the slightly delayed reaction of the regulators is coming, and it's always very interesting to see where this will go. I think the general hypothesis is pretty straightforward, because the crypto ecosystem has been evolving so quickly over the last 2 years, kind of that those three dimensions: dimension of value, complexity, and operations. We're kind of outgrown ourselves a little bit, right, as an industry. And what happens in those models is you really end up with a very high concentration of risk. Right, so you have a very few number of entities sitting on incredible amounts of value in assets, and not having the right governance or operational frameworks in place to be able to manage that properly. And in fact, the biggest risk, and why the regulators are getting involved, is a lot of that value isn't even their own value. It's the value of their users. It's the value of their retail audience, which is exactly why regulation exists in standard finance today, is to protect the user, to protect the retail audience. So I think what we'll see, and we'll continue to see in the industry, is the regulators starting to move in ways where they're going to start to decentralize some of that risk. No pun intended, right? Like, here we are in the crypto ecosystem, which is all about decentralization, but somehow we ended up with majority of the assets sitting with centralized entities. So in fact, what the regulator is saying is that crypto should behave more like crypto, right? We should follow the manifesto. We should be moving towards DeFi. We should be pushing forward with self-custody, right? Because all of those things signal distribution of risk versus concentration of risk, and that's what the industry needs. So in fact, what we do at Ledger, both on the retail side with the hardware wallet and with the self-custody component, and what we do with Ledger on the enterprise side with the business solutions, are very much aligned with this next generation, this next wave of of changes that I think we're going to continue to see in the ecosystem. And on the business side, it's also important to mention that given the regulatory changes and the recent events, there's now a lot of more noise around networks, right? And creating networks for easy settlement or more secure settlement. And one thing for me that's going to be super critical to observe and make sure that the industry understands is that a network is only as secure as the governance that it's built upon, right? There's no point in building networks that are kind of completely software based, right? Because those networks can be compromised and they will be targeted. So it's going to be very important to make sure that the next generation of financial services networks that we build, as we start to distribute some of that risk and accommodate for some of the new regulatory requirements that'll be in place, are built with the right foundational security, governance controls, and capabilities in place, so we're not replicating the same risk profile. Because honestly, just like FTX, which was mismanaged and had bad operational and governance controls, went down and basically took a lot of retail value with it. Same issue could happen with networks that are created in such ways where they don't have the right governance and the right operational controls, right? And if you take down a network, it's no longer just a single entity. It's now many entities, which could be even more massive.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that that, as you said, that this kind of ethos of decentralization, would end up applying from regulators as well. But I think that you explained it well in terms of why that would be, because centralized risk is effectively more risk, and you do have kind of a completely different asset class here, and the opportunity to decentralize that risk. And I think not only when you have decentralized that risk can you build the application layers on top. So that it's I think it's it's unfolding in a super interesting way. Well, I mean, we're at time. I hope this is, I hope this is really, I think for many people, certain audiences is certainly illuminating. So thank you guys for taking the time, to carefully explain it. And we'll see what the audience thinks, and maybe we do a follow up. But what's the, are there things that are kind of, broadly unknown or misunderstood in the space about, either enterprise security or our enterprise product that you guys want to close us out with? Anything we've forgotten?
I think it's a pretty good introduction to what we are doing and why. And now let's see what are the reaction, and probably we will do a follow-up.
100%. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, to synthesize fundamentally, right? Self-custody first for businesses as well as for individuals, right? And then for businesses, governance is imperative and critical, but make sure it's hardware-enabled governance and not just, security theater governance. And then from there, you can build your own adventure.
Perfect. And what I would say to the audience is the horror stories are coming. Please don't be one of them. You've heard it, you get it. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for thank you for caring. But I think two things. One, if you are an organization, please use the best in enterprise security. Do your own research. I think you'll land at Ledger Enterprise, but invite you to do your own research. And if you are not an enterprise customer, if you're just an individual in the space, ask the projects that you care about. Ask the founders of the projects which are meaningful to you. What are they using for enterprise security, and does it stand up to the to the criteria that Charles and Alex have left with us today? So thanks a lot, guys. It's a pleasure to work with you, and I really appreciate you. You guys have taught me so much over my time here, and it's really an honor to be able to be a conduit to that, to bring the knowledge to more people. So thanks so much for being game for it.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you for having us.
This content is provided for informational purposes only and is the sole expression of our opinion, and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. Do your own research. Any loss or profit is your sole responsibility. Stay safe.